How far are you going to be away from this, Adam? Just choose, right?
It's recording now? Okay. Awesome. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today is Related Service Day. We are going to be hearing from related service providers and a student, and we are also going to be conducting an IEP meeting, and then we will be breaking up into groups, and I will be handing out the IEP that I cut and pasted to make it a little bit simpler and easier to read and easier to fill out for our purposes. So you'll have the opportunity to ask each related service provider questions and go over goals based upon your selected student and their diagnoses. So that is our agenda for today, and I am privileged to give you Heather, a speech and language pathologist.
Okay, hi everybody. Hi Heather. So I made little notes. Basically, I'm just going to break down quickly what speech and language is, what some of the disorders you'll see in a school look like, and how that would impact a child's learning, and some things that teachers would implement in the classroom. So first, there's speech, which is basically motor movements and sound production. And there's language, which is basically everything else in the brain. So it's a system for communication, and there's expressive, which is what's coming out, and there's receptive, which is what's going in. So it's just a simple breakdown of that. So speech and language disorders will affect learning in a variety of ways. Language is the basis of communication. So if there's an issue with language, there could be problems with comprehension, with speaking, with social skills, and learning to read can come in, there could be issues with that, and then eventually we're reading to learn, so there could be complications there. So typically with school-aged children, you're going to see speech sound disorders, which is, a sound that's not produced correctly. You'll see language disorders, which will be difficulty with comprehension and or difficulty with expression. Fluency disorders, also known as stuttering, which is an interruption of the forward flow of speech, and voice disorders. So that's anything affecting the quality of voice. You can have nasality, you could have hoarseness, you could have volume too loud or too soft. So the effects of each of those on classroom performance. With speech sound disorders, you might just have difficulty understanding the child. The peers might have difficulty understanding a child, which can result in difficulty with peer relations. Not necessarily, but it's a possibility. And social skills, but that's not, it's not commonly seen, but it can be. And also sometimes later on, there can be some difficulty with sound letter correspondence, which could impact reading, but again, that's not something that you would expect. An articulation disorder is, basically, it's not usually too severe, doesn't usually have a big impact on learning. The big area is language disorders, which there's such a there's a huge gamut with it. With as far as receptive, which is what's going in, following directions, sequencing, recalling details. What else do I have on here? Understanding and then answering questions. As far as expressive, difficulty retelling events, answering a question. There could be vague language. Sometimes there's word retrieval difficulties, so you get a lot of that thing in that place. There's trouble recalling specific details, and sometimes there's misunderstanding social cues with that as well, which can impact peer relations. Fluency and voice you don't see too much academic issues with that. That just might have some of the peer relation, self-esteem stuff going on. And there's language-based learning disability, which are problems with age-appropriate reading, spelling, and or writing. And that can include difficulty with recalling sequences and details of stories or lectures, expressing ideas clearly, like I said before with the language disorders, learning new vocabulary that the child hears or sees, understanding questions and following directions that are heard and or read, and also with sound letter correspondence, we can see difficulties with that, also leading to challenges with spelling and reading. So when, I'm getting hot. So if you're, when planning as a classroom teacher, you know, you're probably going to come across, you know, students with speech and language disorders. It's pretty common. When planning for students with speech and language disorders, you, of course, want to work with the team. So you're going to, I mean, I don't know, like, what, where you guys work, like what it looks like, the setup, but in a lot of schools there are, you know, team meetings that are pretty regular. So you'll be meeting with, you know, the students' SLPs, however often you're going to do that. So you want to work with like special ed staff, SLPs, any other related services, to have an understanding of the students' strengths, challenges, their needs. You're also, you're going to look at the IEP. You're going to consider that as far as prioritizing your goals and your teaching strategies. And you'll make the instruction and curriculum multimodal. So I'm sure you've talked about that a lot. You're going through my presentation? Why?
So to have extra support.
Okay. I made this prezi for last semester when I came in to talk to the class. Basically, if we were going to use this though, at any point the videos were good. But this, I'm just actually summarizing what is in there.
Now we're on the classroom.
So we're like, keep going.
Okay, so
Keep
do you want to?
No.
That's school performance.
Oh, that's my next thing.
Okay.
No, it's not like that. You just do what you want, babe. I'm just gonna keep talking. Okay, so some teaching strategies for students. You can go into the teaching strategies. I talked about how they can affect. Keep going. Just pass this. Go. Go. Okay, so this is just a little more in depth to the multimodal learning. There's kinesthetic learning, so that's doing physical activities. So if you're, I did that bubble example last semester, but if you're learning about
Give that example, because we talked about Howard Gardner's multiple theory of intelligences, and we talked about that last week. So now actually, how would that apply to learning and teaching speech?
Well, it's almost like experiential learning, you know, the movement. The example I did last semester was, you know, I handed out this article about the physics of bubbles, basically, and talking about how the pressure within the bubble had to be something, and the pressure outside of the bubble had, I mean, I can't even explain it to you because it was like over my head. But what I wanted to do was demonstrate how, like, if you blow a bubble really, really fast, you're going to get small bubbles, and if you blow it slower, you get a bigger bubble. Whereas if you just take the you know, we had bubbles, and if you did it, you could see when I blow slower, I make a bigger bubble. When I blow fast, I make smaller bubbles. If I blow too fast, it doesn't even make a bubble. And this article went into the physics behind that. And the article to me was wah, 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 wah. Whereas when, you know, I actually did it, it made sense to me. So that was the example that I used. But for me, another example, not that I learned, I was taught this way, I'm not up to that yet, I'm still on kinesthetic. When I remember a phone number, if you ask me like what the phone number is, I'll go like this in the air. Like that's, you know, I learned through movement. So you know, that's how I remember stuff. So that's just another example of kinesthetic learning. So then another thing to incorporate would be visuals. So that's obviously learning style, ideas, concept, data, things are presented in a visual manner. This is just, you know, with the speech and language, we use Boardmaker a lot with these symbols. If the child can understand that level of abstraction, sometimes I need like an actual photograph. But those are great for sequencing. I'm going to get into that when I go into strategies that you guys can use. So let's just do the next slide then. Okay, so some strategies for teachers that are working with students with speech and language disorders. So you can hand out an outline of what's going to happen ahead of time. Focus on key concepts. As I was reviewing this before, I know you guys had talked about should everyone have an IEP, and I'm not going to get into that, but as far as these strategies, they're gonna benefit all of your students, you know, whether they have a speech and language issue or not. So it's great to use them anyway, but for a child with speech and language disorders, these are supports that are definitely useful and probably necessary. So the use of visual organizers, that was like where you saw those pictures, the board maker symbol. If you say to a student who has like an auditory processing issue or comprehension issues, okay everyone, take out your notebook, take out your textbook, turn to page 67, and we're gonna do the following examples. You're lost. Maybe they'll take out their notebook, or they'll pick up on the first or the last thing you said. So if you either write, you know, if it's a higher level classroom, you could just write out the steps on the board, or if it's younger kids, you know, pictures of the steps that are going to happen. That assists with recalling sequences. Checklists, again for sequencing and completing tasks. Additional modeling and concrete examples. So that's, you know, like maybe showing, you know, if you're doing something with apples, like bringing in apples and touching and describing, things like that. If you're going to change a topic, okay, I'm going to talk about something different now, you know, getting the students to cue in that something different is coming up. Prepare for, oh, that's the transition thing. But even cue the student to listen and attend. Okay, this is very important. Let's pay attention to this point. So just, you know, big flashing lights, pay attention to this, are useful. What's next? Language support. So this is kind of just a continuation of the last slide. So teaching vocabulary of instruction. So this I think is really important. So draw, underline, circle, compare. Does the student even know what that means? If you're giving instructions to circle something or highlight something, sometimes, you know, a child doesn't understand what that even means, or circle or put an X on. That's, you know, following directions, but they might not even understand what that action is. So to teach specific language skills related to the content area curriculum. So vocabulary is a huge thing. I have grammar and social language in there also. But one of the big ones is vocabulary, and using vocabulary guides. So if you have a handout or something, you're looking at a picture or reading an article, you know, maybe on the side or a separate paper with some vocabulary that, you know, that you think that might be challenging for students. And again, this is going to benefit all the students. Creative sabotage to encourage language. I do this all the time with my little ones. I'll be like, the cow goes oink oink, and they think it's hysterical, but it's cueing, you know, it's something that's different that they're going to be like, that's not right. I mean, sometimes the kids don't pick up on it, but, you know, it's something, at least for me, like it makes my teaching more fun. And then explicitly reflect on communication success and failure. So say you have a situation with two kids or something's going on, and they might not be quite getting each other, to reflect on that. About why maybe the communication, where the breakdown was, or things that were good. Oh, I really like the way that you told me about cacti. I don't know what is popped into my head, but whatever you're talking about and learning about, to, you know, praise the specific communicative behavior that went well. Is that the end of it? Okay. Oh, and then this was just like a little activity that I did for the last semester. So, we don't have to do that.
Okay, so what is the most pervasive language-based disability that students would typically see in the classroom?
Well, I mean, it's again general, because there's such a spectrum, but you're going to see, as far as expressive, probably a lot of word retrieval. Describing skills are going to be, you know, you'll see describing skills a lot. With my expressive language students, I'll typically work, you know, depending on their age, but describing skills using like associations, categorization, that's a lot of vocab related. Retelling events, so sometimes, you know, I'll work with the student when I had a private practice, so we'd come out afterwards and we would tell mom what we did. And I mean, sometimes we would do like two things, and these preschoolers, the child wouldn't be able to really explain what we would do. So I always had, you know, like a 3 sequence, right? So this was always up right by my desk where we worked, and we would put our picture of whatever it was we did. So when we came out, I would bring that with us, and you know, little Mary would explain, oh, Mommy, first we read a book, and then and also that's language that I teach too, you know, first, that's, you know, next, last, you know, practice using time concepts like that. What am I doing? Things that they're going to see. With older middle school, I did a lot of reading strategies, like using context clues to figure out what is going on in this paragraph, recalling 3 to 5 details of either a verbally presented paragraph or reading a paragraph, identifying the main idea, like that would be you know, a little bit more middle school. Is that good? Okay.
Well, no. What would you do? Say I'm a student in a 5th grade classroom.
Okay.
And I have a vocabulary deficit, and you are pushing into the classroom.
Okay.
How would you assist me in accessing, let's say, English?
Okay, so the first thing I do is I meet with the teacher, and we talk about what they're going to be covering. And that's good to do, you know, all the time. Even in preschool, like I'm always in collaboration with this classroom teacher. Excuse me. So I get the down low on what's going on in the classroom. I'm pushing in, and if there is a specific vocabulary list that the teacher is working on, I might, if I were seeing the student one-on-one outside of the classroom, during that time I might prep with the vocabulary, do activities with the vocabulary, understanding and using it, and then once I'm in the classroom, if I'm sitting with the student, I might have them highlight, you know, the words that we were targeting in speech, you know, on you know, if they have a reading. If the teacher asks questions, I might say, oh, try using that target word in your answer, and cueing that way. If, you know, if that's an appropriate level. They might, you know, if they're a little lower functioning, it might be a fill in the blank. So if the teacher asks a question, I might provide most of the sentence, and then the student just provide the target word, something like that, you know, depending on, you know, how much support the student needs. Or bring in visual cues. You know, if I'm going to be familiar with the content curriculum, so I might bring in visual cues that'll support the use of the vocabulary.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right, hi guys. So I'm a physical therapist in the Mineola School District. Like Heather said, I work in collaboration with the whole team, the special ed teacher or the general ed teacher. I do have kids in the general ed setting, the occupational therapist, the psychologist, and we all, you know, kind of have meetings and work together. And a lot of PT and OT in the younger grades they kind of overlap a little bit. So a lot of times we work in the same room. We'll put our groups together. We'll work on kind of the same things. But basically, for a kid to qualify for physical therapy in the school system, they have to be, you want to make, they're not safe or independent in the classroom or the surrounding environment. So for an example, you know, they can't navigate their way from point A to point B. They can't sit in a desk and attend to a task, which makes them unavailable for learning. They can't negotiate their classroom environment, so they fall and trip over objects, they bump into peers, they fall out of their chair, things like that. So you have to, you know, we do some standardized tests to show their scores and what their deficits are and their strengths. Some disabilities that you'll see, a lot of times when I say I'm a physical therapist, I work in the school district, people think, oh, for kids that break their leg or their arm, that type of stuff, but it's not that at all. It's kids with disabilities. So you'll see things like Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, autism, just in general, gross motor delay, various different things, but if they don't have a diagnosis of one of those things, they'll be diagnosed OHI, which is other health impairment. But basically they have to have some type of deficit that keeps them behind their peers. So they can't keep up with their peers. They're not participating, or they cannot participate in gym or recess with their peers, things like that. So depending on their disability and their functional level, we would work on things such as trunk strengthening, so strengthening the core, which is where a lot of your movement actually comes from. So if you can't hold your body up straight in the chair, you're probably not going to have enough strength throughout your arm to write, which is an OT issue, but we do, that's how it overlaps.
Can you show them what that would look like?
Why?
Trunk control? So if I don't have
Yeah,
control
so
of
it's
my
funny,
trunk,
whenever we have CSE meetings for every kid with their parent, just to go over how they are. And it's funny, as soon as we talk about trunk control and sitting up straight, you see all the adults in the room, like, right away, they're like this.
Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah.
So basically, if a kid, it is going to be slouching, but it's more like this. They can't, they're all over their desk, or I have kids that are like this, or they're literally like falling off their chair, or they're like this. Like, they just cannot hold their body up. I was doing a group yesterday with a kid, and we were combined with OT, and then we had a few kids on the floor. So one of the activity was magnet tiles. I don't know if you guys know those blocks that, like, with their magnet, they form together. And I had a kid, literally, he was like this. They were supposed to be sitting like this, crisscross applesauce, because this is how you work on trunk strength. And he was like this. I'm not kidding. So I'm like, Jaden, you have to sit. He could not. He couldn't. So they're just like all over. They cannot hold their body up. Even walking through the hallway, you'll see they're like leaning against the wall like this. They're just, you can totally pick them out in the crowd. Okay?
great.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So basically, going back to that, if they don't have enough trunk strength to sit up in their chair, then that's what we call, they're not available for learning. They can't physically attend to the lesson trying to be taught. Also, things that we work on are lower extremity strengthening, so strengthening through the legs. This works on balance, so if there are stairs that they have to go up and down, that's where your lower extremity strength comes in. Hopping on one foot, standing on one foot, all these skills that carry out, you think about safety. So for a fire drill, can a kid negotiate the environment to get out of a building safely if he doesn't have, appropriate lower extremity strength, trunk strength? So those are the things, like, even though we work through play, we're working on functional skills. So they have to be safe and independent in the school environment. Other things that we'll work on are bilateral coordination, so skipping, coordinating both sides of your body, jumping jacks, hand-eye coordination, ball skills we do, so bouncing and catching a ball, throwing and catching a ball, kicking a ball, because that's what they're expected to do in gym and in recess to keep up with their peers. So those are some things that we'll work on. What else?
If you were to push into a classroom,
Yes.
what would you be doing with a student with a specific disability, let's say cerebral palsy?
Okay, so physical therapists don't typically push into classrooms, but on the occasion, I'll go to get a kid and they're doing some, they're gingerbread making for the holidays, and you really don't want to miss it because everyone's mom and dad or grandma, whoever's there, and so okay, I'll push him. So you work on exactly that. Seating, positioning, sitting at the chair, getting up and down from the chair safely, negotiating the environment, getting from the desk to the table over there to get the gumdrops, coming back safely, walking around peers, getting into and out of your chair, up and down from the floor, those type of things.
What would an OT be doing in the classroom, possibly with regard to writing?
Okay, so OTs typically do push-in my district at least, and they do a half an hour to an hour push-in once or twice a week, depending on how long it is, and they'll work on handwriting or some type of fine motor skill. So sometimes it plays a part in speech where, we have some kids that are nonverbal and they use PECS communication, which is Picture Exchange Communication System. They have a book with those pictures that Heather showed you guys before, so they're nonverbal. So So you'll work on things like, there's a picture that says I want, and then a picture that says,